Ah! Greetings, brethren, CloakingDonkey here. Time once more to talk about Camelot Unchained. As you probably noticed, the frequency of these videos has gone down a little bit, mostly because I want to stretch them out, because I still don't know when Beta 1 is going to happen, and I really don't have much more that I can do about Camelot Unchained without the beta. Alright, let's talk about classes. The classes in general are certainly different from what contemporary MMOs have told us about classes. Instead of the more broader archetypes of today, such as warrior, mage, priest, the classes in Camelot Unchained are going to be much narrower, fluff-heavier, defined, and a lot more specialized as well. What that means specifically is that classes are going to be a little bit more locked into one role. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some leeway for most of the classes. And with the game of course not being a PvE game, the roles also don't have to be quite as strictly defined, and there is no need for anything like a tank, heal, DPS trinity. Of course you still want healers and you still want your tanky characters, but the tanky characters, for example, don't have to be specifically sword and board based on defense, keeping aggro and all that sort of thing. They can be a lot broader in what they do and what their job is in a group. Healers can also vary a lot more, because a game like this can also have hybrids, with characters being half a mage and half a healer, meaning your specific focused healers don't have to be in any specific way, because they can always be supplemented by support classes. In total, there are currently 30 confirmed classes for Camelot Unchained, 10 for each of the realms. But of these 30 classes, only 18 are definitely going to be in by launch. The other 12 might be in at launch, but they might also come after the launch of the game. These 30 classes are also separated into 10 archetypes, with each realm having one of each of these archetypes. Now, however, these archetypes aren't necessarily based on roles, such as tank or healer or control. They could certainly also just be focused on a theme or a specific gameplay element. The 6 of these class archetypes that are definitely going to be in at launch are the heavy fighters, the healers, the devout, the mages, the support, and the archers. Heavy fighters are heavily armored melee characters and tanks. This includes the Black Knight, the Phew, and the Merliah. The healer archetype is based on a role, that of the healer, and its classes are the physician, the empath, and the stone healer. The devout are characterized more by their thematic composition of being a mage-healer hybrid. Now, what specific role these characters are going to fulfill is a little bit hazy right now, because we don't have all of their abilities and all of their skills, but all 3 of them are certainly magic-based and mix their magics with the healsies. And these classes are the Abbot, the Blessed Crow, and the Hailbound. The Mage archetype is one that is certainly not bound by a specific gameplay type role, and more bound by thematics. All of the 3 characters in this category are pure magic users, but they're not specifically all damage dealers or all control casters, but are in fact of different roles. And they are the Flame Warden, the Druid, and the Water Weaver. The support classes are in fact all support, but you can expect some of them to be a little bit more involved in the combat than others, and they might also be a little bit more for beneficial group support, as well as debuff support against the enemy. And these are the Minstrel, the Dark Fool, and the Skald. And then lastly, for the release classes, we have the Archers, which are also not necessarily bound to a specific role and is much more an archetype once more, and these are the Blaggard, the Forest Stalker, and the Winter's Shadow. Now, to give you an example of how these archetypes vary, let's run through the heavy fighters and mages. So the Black Knight is definitely your more stereotypical heavy tank character. Shield, plate armor, sword, really hard to kill, but slightly weaker on the offense. Sure, they can equip their polearms and two-handed weapons and probably deal relatively decent damage, but the main focus of the class is certainly to protect and serve. The Tuatha De Danaan's Fian, on the other hand, is a little bit more of a hybrid, bringing a bunch of group buffs in the form of battle shouts, and they're also a little bit weaker on the specific defense side of things, and instead bolster that with protective barriers they can put on themselves, as well as a lot of evasion type tanking. The Merliah is a lot different from the other 2 because it focuses a lot more on the offensive side of the tanking. It is also a melee and caster hybrid, utilizing a lot of lightning magic, as well as focusing quite heavily on the hammer as their main weapon. The Merliah is of course still a tank and still capable of taking the hits for their allies, but their focus is certainly also in being right up there and punching people in the face really hard. So while all three of these heavy fighters are tanks, you can see that they are going to act quite differently on the battlefield and that they are going to fit into groups in quite a different way from each other. Now with the mages it's completely different because none of these really fill the exact same role. The Flame Warden, for example, is entirely focused on dealing lots of damage with fire magic. They're also entirely based on long range and bombarding enemies from really far away, and are most likely going to be rather weak on the defense side. The Druid seems like it will focus heavily on AoE and area control, as well as being able to cast more on the move, on the fly, and in situations where they are being threatened by melee characters. Still focusing on damage, but not quite as heavily and straightforward as the Flame Warden. The Water Weaver, entirely different, as it's more focused on control and support magic, and not so much direct damage attacks. Obviously the Water Weaver still has direct damage attacks. It is much more about synergy with other classes, such as the Mjolnir, because water and lightning kind of go together in fantasy games. So expect the Water Weaver to be more on the debuff, support and control side than on the direct damage fireballs in your face side. Now while a lot of these classes are going to be narrow and niche in what their kit allows them to do, there will still be a lot of room for customization and choice in what you want your character to specialize on. Take the Blaggard for example. It is a pure archer class that is entirely specialized in ranged combat. This means they are most likely going to be really weak in melee. They're not going to have any heals, they're not going to have any pets, or any greater support or control capabilities, because they are so focused at shooting people at range. However, the breadth of their abilities will still allow them to have all sorts of capabilities that they can specialize in, such as using more magical arrows that debuff the enemy and make them easier to kill for their teammates, or maybe specialize on slightly more skirmish range combat instead of the ultra long range combat, and things such as that. And now there are of course 4 more archetypes that, as I said in the beginning, might not entirely be in the game at launch. We don't know, this is all a time question of course, and with how long the game has already been delayed, we're probably not going to see all of these classes right away. And these 4 post-launch archetypes are the Shapeshifters, the Stealthers, the Scouts, and the Pet Summoners. The Shapeshifters, much like the Mages, are entirely based on theme and not on role. These characters fulfill very different roles indeed, ranging from damage dealers to debuffers to tanks. And on top of that, they are also the most versatile classes in the game, because with their shapeshifting abilities they can fulfill more than one role. And they are the Enchanted Knight, the Dullahan or Black Rider, and the Child of Loki. The Stealthers are all sneaky, stabby classes, but they do also specialize in various areas, with some of them being a lot more focused on damage, others being a little bit more supporty and focused on debuffing. And they are the Veilstalker, the Red Cap, and the Shadow Walker. The Scouts are a very unique and interesting concept. These are in fact not necessarily combat classes. They will have a few effects of course that will be absolutely great in combat and will be wonderful support for your teammates, but in general these classes are not based around directly fighting the enemy. They are based around scouting out the enemy. How this is going to work? We don't know. We'll have to see. But the concepts are certainly interesting, and the classes are the Spectre, the Wisp, and the Arisen. And then lastly we have the Pet Summoners, and once again these fill various different roles, with the Viking one specializing slightly more in melee, the Arthurian one being a slightly more traditional pet caster, and the Tuatha Dé Danann one being the main magical damage dealer of the realm. And they are the Dreadcaller, the Morrigan, and the Slaughter Wolf. Sadly, beyond basic theme and minor teasers, we don't know all too much yet about these classes, and I will certainly keep you apprised as Beta 1 happens, and I will finally be allowed to talk about all the specifics of these cool and interesting classes. Alright, that is it for this episode of Camelot Unchained Examined. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and maybe you'll learn something about this game that we are hopefully one day actually going to play. Do consider giving the video a like and subscribe if you want to see more MMO content, specifically about the upcoming generation of crowdfunded MMORPGs. Look forward to more Camelot Unchained content in the future. But until then, I've been the CloakingDonkey, and I will see you in another video!